Welcome in this Mobycon webinar on the economics of cycling, focused on bicycle education. My name is Angela van der Kloof, consultant at Mobycon. I'm here in the studio with Ellen Bartley. Welcome, Ellen. Ellen is an economist from Transylvania University in the US. And he's been around with us in an internship, in his sabbatical in the last weeks. And we talk about the economics of cycling in this webinar.
Yes.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yes, well, thank you for being here with me today and also helping me generally with my sabbatical. I am on sabbatical from my university in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm researching the economics of cycling. That's why I'm talking about it here, specifically bicycle education. And I ended up here at Mobycon. A partner and I, another professor, Sharon Brown of exercise science, we've brought students twice in 2017 and 19, and we hope to bring them again in 2023 to experience. The class name is the Public Policy and Culture of Health in the Netherlands. And big, broad, we want to see about Netherlands generally, but we want it to, in part, to show students how they can bike across the Netherlands and throughout big cities and small cities. And so we've brought them here twice, and both times Mobycon has brought a great study tour for us while we were in Delft. And so I asked to come, and I've been here with the experts ever since for the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, and it's great to have you here in our office and working with our team, because it's interesting for us to learn about the perspective of an economist on mobility, because we're oftentimes focused on rather on the movement and on how to come up with solutions, but economists have a particular way of also looking at the same topic, and I think it is nice to learn from each other. Yeah. And see where the expertise can help each other. And what I really like about your study tours is that you ask the students to bring all their stuff in bags, and they have to carry it on the bikes from the airport all the way through several provinces until they go back home.
Yes.
And that is really a good experience, as you told me before, you are all for experiential learning, so this fits really well.
It does, and part of why I'm here at Mobycon, what we'll talk about today, is that experiential. But yes, the students, we want them to see it. I'm telling a university student, they sign up for the course voluntarily, of course, but telling them that they'll be traveling 2 weeks from Amsterdam. And for your viewers that know the country, we go to Leiden and Delft and Rotterdam and Den Haag, Haarlem and back over 2 weeks. So they're biking the whole way to different cities, and we'll stay in each city a couple of days. But if we have a flat tire, we fix it ourselves. We don't have any vans or anything. I see a lot of tours in the US. All tours are great, study tours. But we tell students you should be able to pack it on a backpack or panniers, and that's it. And so they learn for 2 weeks. And we try to be like the Dutch, not that Dutch go from Amsterdam to Rotterdam on a bike all the time, but that they should be able to bike and get in the city and bike as well. And yes, we found that they have learned a whole lot from that experience.
Yeah, I think that really ties nicely to this, feeling of independence that cycling brings, and that in the Netherlands, cycling is really connected to this, independence, and children cycle from a young age on because we value the independent mobility.
Yes. No, I think so. And as an economist, I do a lot of research studies. We use a lot of numbers. I think people think of stock prices and so on, but economists really think about what we're giving up generally, right? And so if we're talking about a hydropower project, bringing cheaper prices to somewhere in the U.S., like we're looking at for green energy, but not everybody's in favor of those, right? And everybody likes cheap electricity, but people worry about things like my views, at least I hear a lot of this in the U.S., my views from transmission lines or windmills, which I see all the time here. And those have to be measured, or probably should be measured to an economist to be able to see, yes, we should think about health, climate change effects, but other aspects as well, so that we measure everyone's feelings, telling people this is what you should or shouldn't do. And I think Mobycon probably deals with that a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Mobility, you can say this is the best way, but you have to convince people. And so economists measuring those things and giving rise to, yes, your view of something is important. Let's measure that compared to something else. And we oftentimes do that through things like surveys, right? How much do you spend a vacation to go see beautiful views? And we try to put a dollar amount on that. And hopefully I can do that in the future for something like this.
Yeah, and so this webinar, the idea is, let's focus on bicycle education, because there are some studies on the value of building infrastructure, but when it comes to bicycle education, it's probably a bit more complicated, or it isn't that much researched. And that's the reason why you're looking at this, right?
That is exactly right. You're correct. And lots of times the studies that you and I have talked about the last 5 weeks are measuring things like how much time you can cut out from your commute if you bicycle, right? Or how much pollutants don't go into the air and cause health problems. So lots of studies about the health benefits of bicycling, but there haven't been nearly as many on bicycle education, the value of it. I think we all know it has value, but there aren't that many studies that put a real dollar amount in it, and just looking at the individual, right? In my hometown of Lexington, Kentucky, and I'll show some videos soon, I believe that we've done a great job since I've lived there of changing it and making it more bike friendly. But just because you build infrastructure doesn't convince everyone to do it. So I'm trying to really figure out a little bit more of what convinces people like you and me to say, I'm going to do this. And so you're right, there's not nearly as many studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you also try to do that by experiencing cycling in the Netherlands with your family?
I did, yes. And so I brought students before, as I said, but for me, I bicycle a lot, but I also walk. So I know Mobycon is all about mobility and not just bicycling. But I luckily live in a place where I can walk a lot, but I also try to bike. I consider myself certainly not the fearless in classifications we oftentimes see. I consider myself enthused but confident. With my family and even with my college students who haven't been on bikes for a while, I put them in that third, probably biggest category, 50-60% of people that they're interested but concerned. And so when we can do experiential, I can see students go from that. And so I've taped some things from my time at home and my time in the Netherlands with my family to kind of look at and see and be able to show people later for research purposes, this is the way things, you might see them, but this is the way they could be and how that makes them feel about things. I think if they can experience it firsthand, it's best, but not everyone, unfortunately, can come to the Netherlands. But if they can, they should.
Yeah, and so, shall we have a look at some videos?
Yes, that'd be great.
So where is this video that we're going to
Yes, so this is actually in Lexington, Kentucky, where I live. I've lived there over 20 years. And what I'm going to show you, I'm just going to show you a couple of brief sections, but especially for your viewers in America, I think that they would kind of see this. This is a very small street, but you can see we're in a downtown area, right? So this is a feeder street. And I'll show it here. By the way, the videographer here is my 12-year-old son. So the GoPro is on his head. And I say that because I think it's important to know what we're kind of looking at here, right? So this is me. He's behind me. We're coming to the end of a street. You'll notice here I'm signaling. We signal in the Netherlands. I like to stop here to show briefly, for those, again, who are in America, we know that I'm also an LCI, a league certified instructor from the League of American Bicyclists. And this is oftentimes what we would call taking the lane. And you and I have talked about that. We do things differently in the US. I see construction coming. I have a 12-year-old son behind me. I don't want to make sure that I have to fight cars. So I take it over at the very beginning. We'll see later that this is not what we see necessarily in the Netherlands, right? But when we bike, we're going down, you see there is no bike infrastructure. We're on a small city street, but we're going into downtown. I'm approaching a street here where there are 3 lanes of one-way traffic. So a lot of cities in America have this type of thing, right? Small feeder streets. I'm obviously signaling, but to show you here, and again, I think my city is great, but this is another thing different than the Netherlands. I'm afraid of this car. I'm afraid of this car for me, but also for my son. So I've pulled over onto a sidewalk here. To be fair, if you look on the other side of the street, we have just put new infrastructure in where it's bicycle separated. And I'm going to show that here to be able to look. But I think that that's one of those big things where, you know, when we're about to cross here, you can see a new infrastructure. We're doing a lot of downtown development, a lot of areas are, a lot of places in the US, they put these things together. So here you can see a path that will soon, after all the construction is done, will have bicycling next to pedestrians. This is what I would call state of the art for the US. My city has done great things, right? But would I feel comfortable with my 12-year-old biking through here with all this traffic to the right here? And the short answer is I would not. My son bicycles well. We've been bicycling a long time. I don't feel comfortable with him riding through that. Right? And so I think that that's one to kind of see a basic idea of why I don't feel as comfortable.
And do you feel comfortable when you're on your own?
I do. I'm an enthused but confident, right? And so I will hopefully show you some more here, a little bit more of the 360 point of view that he and I do together. This is a brand new bike path. It's separated, right? This is right behind the city center that we just went through. It's two-way bicyclists. It's separated. Again, I believe my city is really, really making some headway, some major headway in the 20 years I've lived there. I feel very confident here. But it's the same thing I asked before. Would everyone feel confident, right? Would I let my 12-year-old son ride through here? I'm not for sure. As you can see, when I'm with him, I'm still wearing the helmet. I've got a bicycle light on in the middle of the day. Why do I do this? That's what we're instructed to do, right? It's very different. We want to feel comfortable and we want to make sure that we're seen. We hear a lot about this, make sure you're seen and so on. And so I've done that here and I think I feel comfortable, right? But, and again, want to make sure, I think my city has just done the best. We have bicycle paths out into the countryside for recreation. These bike paths are connecting neighborhoods to these bigger bike paths for commuters. You can see here, of course, to be fair, it's not all done, but there's a lot of sand and silt, right? This is not being actually used very much yet. And so it is relatively new. You see that we're going into districts where there's a lot of commercial development. There's industrial, but there's commercial. But I think I could see this really being used for commuters.
And can I ask you something?
Yes.
Because when I see this and you're together with your son, then I'm thinking, well, there's not a lot of bicycle traffic.
No.
Not at that point of time, at least. Yes. So if I were there with my son, I would bike next to each other. Yes,
good point. That two abreast. Yes, very true. We didn't hear, we don't do that as much in the U.S. I think we should, but it's interesting you say that. I think because I'm used to what it used to be. This is a new path. My wife and I, when our children were smaller, we had them in trailers, and we would go down just this road here. You could see this is 35 mile per hour traffic, and cars are actually traveling faster than that. it gets scary. We would never get too next to each other.
I can understand that, but it's I think it's really core in our way of cycling that if it is somehow possible to cycle two abreast, then we would typically do it, especially when you're with your child.
Yes, I agree with you, and I think.
And I'm not, saying that you should do it there,
right.
But it's an observation.
No, I think it's a very important one. I think a lot of, and so I don't want to speak for all cyclists in America, obviously, but you're right. I think lots of times we see it as using it to get from point A to B. Mm-hmm. And when I show you what we have in Delft, you're right. I don't think it's like that. And I don't think it should be. And so that's one reason I think when people see things, a lot of people in the U.S., if they would come to our city and see this, they would say, this is so much better than my city. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't feel comfortable, as you said, kind of living or feeling. Mm-hmm. It doesn't at all. Yeah. I agree.
And is there an economic angle to that?
Well, I think part of it is the cost factor. This, as you know, working with Mobycon, took years and millions of dollars to get this, to take something. And so for me, I think it's the cost is obvious, the dollar amount. But part of my studies I want to do is who's going to use this, right? Uh-huh. And why? And some of those studies are out there. But back to your point of if you visited with your son and what you would want to do, what would it take to get people to try this, to mm-hmm. see that this is a way of life, to maybe move to a different area? I don't think we do as much at the individual level about helping people figure out this is there, will they take it, and why? And that values you mentioned earlier, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I transmit myself or try to be an economist, and then I would also think, oh, okay, so at least this bike path, it has a width. When it's low traffic, you can cycle two abreast. Yes. And for me, that would be more value than a cycle path that is too small to cycle or too narrow.
Agree with you. Yes. And I like the way you say that. It is the value. And if I can take that a step further, I think that value is oftentimes in research, we talk about quality of life factors, right? Yes, it's not just for health reasons, getting from point A to B. It's wanting to speak with someone, right? Wanting to interact, wanting to feel like you're part of an environment as opposed to it's just a mode of transport. Mm-hmm. And I agree, that value of not just buying it and building it, but how we feel and experience it, to me, is just as important. And I think unfortunately, something we don't study enough, right?
Yeah.
So this is my family in Delft, just taken recently. And one of the things I really want to show you is what you and I were just talking about, of how comfortable you feel. This is a 9 and 12-year-old. They've been biking, but in the US, it's helmets, it's staying in a straight line, it's watching for traffic. And I'd really like viewers to see, and this would be similar with my university students. Right? So these are younger kids, but university students who are used to riding in the US, this is what they experience. This is not Amsterdam Central, but it does show kind of that value of just being able to enjoy it. So we're biking through Delft. You can see the church and so on, right? For all the American viewers, you can see here the immense amount of bicyclists who are in this area. You are used to this here, right? We are not as used to this in the United States, but you can see who's bicycling here. You can see that my children are just following along, right? They're going through quite easily. They have a very good time. They love it, right? What I'll show is what I think interesting is coming up is, again, for those of us who are in the US and not necessarily used to this. I love this type of scene here. So we're coming, we see parents with children walking. We see people that are older that are bicycling through the city. My family is coming up. We can look both ways. There's not this big, we have to stop. In America, it's all about rights and rules, and we must stop and so on. This is a family just going out for a nice leisurely visit, right? We could see that there's vehicles, we go around them, we pass, and again, my children, who've only been here a week at this point, right? Hopefully you can see they're having a good time, right? My daughter is smiling, we're just riding. We are all really just going to wherever we need to be. And again, this is normal for here. I think my daughter is signaling, right? On her own. I've got the GoPro. She's standing up, she's enjoying herself. Again, American viewers will probably see that this is not something they ever see. If you're in a suburb street in front of your home, you will see this. This is commercial. This is downtown Delft. And we just don't see this type of experience here. And I think it's very important, right? I want to measure, if possible, by that. And I like to show one more thing here. So there just now, if you notice, my daughter, maybe we can focus in on her a little bit. She sees this car coming. I don't have to tell her. She looks briefly, but she knows it's going to stop. Why? She's already been biking here for a week. So that type of atmosphere where families can just ride through. By the way, we're on the way to a train station. My kids loaded up their bikes on a train and we took it to Rotterdam and rode around. And again, I think the value of that, seeing it and experiencing it, my children have already seen night and day. And I think my university students have as well. But maybe we can show more of this to others or have them do more study tours. And that's what I'm really trying to get out of my research.
Yeah, and so you see education with this experiential learning. It is not just about, sitting in a classroom, having a book or a professor saying you have to do this or you have to do that, but rather about a more natural way of doing things, and by doing, you learn how it works.
Yes, and a lot of my economics classes that way. We might work with nonprofit organizations, so instead of just, as you said, reading, I can tell them what it's like, I can tell them the value, and you and I have also talked about that. I'm that league certified instructor. Some people need to learn how to get on a bike and actually pedal. That's not what I mean by bicycle education. I'm talking more broadly about seeing the value of what you can get out of it, and not just how to pedal or pedal safely or check your brakes, but that bigger value system.
Yeah, and so I guess in the Netherlands, this type of education for most children and young people, they gather this through their daily lives because their parents take them in the front seat or in a bakfiets, cargo bike, or by seeing others on the bike and seeing you can go shopping with your bike, or you can go to the sports club or whatever. But all this type of learning in daily life. And it is happening, and I'm sure there is a cost to that, because it costs, thinking about myself when my children were little, it costs a lot of energy and it costs time. But later on, your children are independent, like when they're 12 and they cycle to school themselves, they go to their friends, and you don't have to chauffeur them around anymore as a parent. So that's a huge benefit.
It is, right. And that education you talked about, I think, is very important here. When I say I'm studying the economics of cycling, bicycle education, I think people think I'm trying to teach someone to pedal.
Yeah,
right?
It's about a program that teaches people to ride.
And as you said, it's formal in the Netherlands. I first came here to try to see it in the school systems, and it's been a little bit difficult to do. But I think the informal part is they just grow up with it, and it is an education still. But as you said, it has lots of benefits later on, but it also has costs, right? But when we talk, I think, especially for the American viewers, about changing this in the US, there are a handful of schools that do this. But statewide and nationally, most schools do not have any kind of here's how you bicycle and what you get out of it type of thing. And I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. But I think this idea of, but we can show people the value of doing it individually, whether we start out as families, so on, I think does have a lot of value to it. And it is getting a little bit closer to a model that you have every day that we don't necessarily have in the U.S. and probably elsewhere around the world. So I think for me, one of the reasons that I was so excited about coming here to Mobycon, I'm looking for partners and looking for Mobycon because I've worked with you before, but I'm also interested in looking for other partners that are out there. This idea of study tours, that language is used. I don't mind using it because I think a lot of others have. You and I have talked about some articles, even recently in 2021 and less than a year ago, in the Research in Transportation Business and Management, which is an academic journal, right? But we had talked about an article called Learning from Abroad and Interdisciplinary Exploration of Knowledge Transfer in the Transport Domain. So a lot about mobility, but it's also about that knowledge transfer. And what they were looking at were these study tours. People in my city have done it, where they come to countries like the Netherlands that are well known, and groups like Mobycon help teach them. Pilot studies, I've learned a lot about here at Mobycon. And so, but this particular thing was closer to my research, this idea of knowledge transfer. Where does it end up? And the short is, just from this one article, they talked about that it's hard to measure that. It's hard to measure what people learn. All educators know that. But it's not just how well you do on a test, but to know like whether it affected your organization or your city, that's really hard to know after the fact. So I believe, and this article talked about, that there are some ways, if you do pre-studies of what people know beforehand or surveys, post-surveys, maybe a year later, contact people again, you can sense like a longitudinal or an attitude or behavioral shift. For my students in college, I think we can look at a life shift. They're leaving home, they're at a 4-year college, they're mostly on their own. That's when a lot of things change. They learn academic content, but they also learn about being newly free adults, so to speak. And so I think for me, I'm looking for partners, anyone who's interested out there, who be able to look at these study tours, whether they be for professionals or city officials or for college students who is interested in maybe coming together. And if many of us can agree on a type of survey or an interview, and many of us are doing it, I think we can find out lots of good material about real outcomes for individuals and their organizations and their cities as well.
Yeah, so it is about understanding what the value is. There is, again, in this word, the value, maybe not just in dollars, but also in different fields of life, the value of understanding how bicycling could, what it could look like in daily life, and experiencing that, and how you could use that experience in your own situation.
I like the way you said that. That's really what I'm think my research is heading towards, that in your own situation. I think lots of city officials know that bicycling has wonderful, wonderful benefits. It has some costs, but generally they've already decided the benefits really outweigh the costs. Those studies have already been completed. I believe in them, but I really do see from a personal perspective, but also teaching students and education in general, that lots of individuals, especially in the US and probably across the world, it's not that easy. A lot of people aren't ready to jump on a bike if they had a bicycle path outside their home. In the US, we oftentimes live far away. We have cars. And so until you really see that you can change things a lot individually, your own self, and you can see the value in that. Yes, for climate change, yes, for the environment, but also for yourself and your quality of life. I think that's a hard part for some people to see. And so I really would like to see people who are doing study tours and who are doing other things to see if they can work together to show people more. I think when they do a study tour, people say, wow, I learned so much. But I know talking to you, the difference between going from a pilot study to a full-blown, we've changed society is more difficult. And so I think at an individual level, we can do more research on trying to show that.
Yeah, nice. And of course, as practitioners, I would say, we're also always keen to hear from others who are interested in this or involved in this, and see how we can collaborate with you and others who are interested in bringing this topic further.
Well, and that's why I really came to Mobycon. I didn't expect in 5 weeks to complete some project, as you and I have talked about. But the idea behind that, though, is that practitioners are important. They're the ones that people come to for advice, right? Oftentimes, Mobycon and other organizations, they're the ones doing the study tours, right? But they're doing the study tours because there's a reason to, and they're valuable, but I think that we can work together as academics and as practitioners and as policymakers to say, how can we put this in, as you said, not just numbers, but things that regular people who aren't academics, who aren't practitioners, who aren't policymakers, for them to realize, oh, I get it, right? We're gonna have to give them more things from interviews and surveys saying, here's what people thought before and after, you should try this, as opposed to just listening to some professor tell you that this is the way. That never works very well.
No, students tell me anyway.
Well, but to be honest, it was a pleasure to listen to you, to this professor for this webinar. I would like to thank you again for joining Mobycon with your research, and also for the invitation for everyone to reach out if they want to know more about this or want to get involved. And you have a few more days left in the Netherlands, so I hope you and your family enjoy it.
Thank you very much. And yes, again, for anybody who's interested, if you can reach out with the contact information to Angela or to myself, that would be a great way for us to stay connected and for us to see working together, right? I've loved watching the Mobycon webinars over the last year and a half or two. And so, yes, if others are interested in this, please contact me and Angela and Mobycon, and maybe we can find out more valuable information together.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angela.